little snippet that you just heard was the beginning part of the third movement of a sonata in E-flat major by Marianna Von Auenbrugger. And today we're going to talk about why we all need Marianna Von Auenbrugger in our lives now. If what you heard was any indication, her sonata is so beautiful and lovely and exciting and musical, and I absolutely fell in love with it. So I want to share it with you today, and I want to share a little bit about her with you. Because first of all, she was a woman composer during a time when it wasn't as common for women to be composing, and also from a time period where we don't have a lot of surviving works from the women composers of that time because they weren't encouraged to publish anything. Now, before we jump in and start talking about her life and this gorgeous piece of music, I had an idea that I wanted to share with all of you. So I've been thinking about doing a video, or perhaps a video series, with real playing examples from you. So I was curious if anyone would be willing to upload your own video of you playing to YouTube or to Google Drive or something and share the link with me in the comments below. And I would need at least 3 submissions most likely, and I could probably do a lot more than that, and I could always break it up into separate videos if needed. But I would really like to give you comments and to hear your playing and to be able to see your playing on a video and address anything that you want me to address very specifically. So if anybody's interested in that, comment below and let me know, and then comment below and put a link of you playing, and I'll start reviewing them and I'll start putting together that video. I think it would be really awesome, and I think we could all really learn from a video like that. So if anyone is willing to be brave and do it, I would love that. I would need the submissions within the next 2 or 3 weeks in order to incorporate them into the first video. So go ahead and drop those links in the comments below. All right, so Marianna Von Auenbrugger was alive during the classical period of Western classical music history. So the classical period went from about 1750 to 1825, and other composers that were alive during the classical period were Beethoven, Mozart, Haydn, Salieri, all of those guys. And Marianna Von Auenbrugger lived from 1759 to 1782. She unfortunately died when she was really young, in her early 20s, of consumption, but she lived right there in the beginning of that classical time period. Now, she was an Austrian pianist and composer, and she was very, very highly regarded in her time. Her and her sister were both students of Franz Joseph Haydn, who's one of the big composers of the classical period. If you've never heard of him, look him up. His sonatas are, in my opinion, underrated and some of my absolute favorites, and you can hear me playing one of his sonatas in E-flat right here. Haydn taught Mozart and Beethoven as well. He's the older of the 3. And Marianna Von Auenbrugger also took lessons and knew Salieri, who, if you've seen the movie Amadeus, you might already know who Salieri is. He was also a composer during this time period and had, somewhat of a relationship with Mozart, we'll say. Now, during this time period in Europe and in the United States, it wasn't really common for women to have careers or to be composers. Women were not thought of as creators. Women were thought of as wives and homemakers and people that were supposed to help make society better from the home, not from outside of the home. Now, it was important for women to be cultured and to have talents and things like that. And in this time period, it was very common for women to learn how to play the piano. At least among middle and upper class society in Europe, there were often instruments in the home. The women of those classes of society would often take lessons and become quite proficient at the instruments. Some of them did do composing lessons and some of them did compose, but we don't have a lot of published works by women composers because it wasn't common for them to be published or for their music to be used commercially or widespread. At this time period, women did perform sometimes and more often than they had in the past, especially with the rise of Italian opera, the need for really high soprano voices. But outside of those very specific circumstances, women weren't touring around being concert pianists or anything like that at that time. And again, the women that were opera singers or the women that were accomplished pianists were most often from aristocratic families or families in high standing, families of wealth, families of privilege. Now, a lot of the information that I was able to find about Marianna Von Auenbrugger's life was written by Gregory. And I'll link the website where I found it down in the description. And he had an incredibly thorough paper about Marianna Von Auenbrugger and another composer from this time period, Marianne von Martinez. And so it's a really interesting paper if you're interested in reading about it, but I'm going to summarize some of the things that he said and some of his key points. So we don't have a ton of information about Marianna Von Auenbrugger. If you Google her and you look at her Wikipedia page, there's just a couple sentences. There's not a lot there. And part of that is because she died so young, and so she didn't live a very long time. And part of that is just because, until somewhat recently, in the span of history, nobody was interested in women composers. So Marianna and her sister, like I said, were students of Haydn, and they played the piano, they composed, they also did perform, and they actually attracted a little bit of attention as performers during their lives. But like I said before, that couldn't really go very far because they were women. And in Gregory Hayes' writing, he quotes something from a writer's observation in a music journal. It was written on October 22nd in 1800. I'm going to summarize what he said, but I'm going to use some of his wording because it's very key. And he said that every well-bred girl, whether she has talent or not, must learn to play the piano or sing. First of all, because it is fashionable, and secondly, because it is the most convenient way for her to put herself forward attractively in society, and therefore, if she is lucky to make a matrimonial alliance, particularly a moneyed one. So he's describing that in this time period, girls should play the piano because it's fashionable, it's the hip thing to do, and also because a woman with talents or a woman that could play the piano was seen as a more desirable wife and could potentially increase her standing and increase the amount of money that she was worth. Okay, I'm not going to get into all of that because that could be like a video of many hours of me ranting, but you get the point. So you can see here on the cover of this sonata that she wrote that we have written her first and last work with the Italian spelling of her name. And then there's a picture of a sad cherub next to a female silhouette kind of hovering over this tombstone and this gravesite. And some people think that Salieri actually paid to have her sonata composed after she died. And the picture on the cover of the work kind of suggests that it was published after she did pass away. And I just think it's so cool that right here in IMSLP, which I will also link IMSLP down in the description below, that's where you can find the score. It's in the public domain. I think it's so cool that they included the original cover so that we get to see that, and we get to see this glimpse into some historical art on the cover of her sonata. Now, I was really curious what it said on the tomb. I think it's Latin, and I put it into Google Translate, and it came up as shadow survivor. I feel like there must be some nuance that Google Translate isn't getting there, but I'm really curious if anybody knows what the translation to English of what it says on the tomb is. I would be super interested to know, and I would love it if you would comment that below. So she had a fascinating life. I really wonder what would have happened had she lived beyond her early 20s. Would she have composed more works? Would she have gained more fame and notoriety as a composer, as a performer? It would have been so cool to see, but unfortunately we just have this one sonata from her. So I will include the full recording of the third movement at the end of this video, but what you heard at the beginning was just a little snippet of the third movement, and I'm going to talk mostly about the third movement. It's the most popular and it's the one that I've studied, but the first and second movement are also really, really, really beautiful, and you can hear the first movement not played by me, but you can hear the first movement played right here, and I'll link that in the description below as well, and then you can hear the second movement played right here, and I'll link that in the description below as well. And then at the end of this video, I'll include my full performance of the third movement. So the third movement of the sonata is a rondo, and a rondo is a form of music that has several different sections that then alternate and repeat throughout the rest of the piece. And so in this piece, we have the A section. We have a B section. We then have a repeat of the A section. And then a C section. And then a repeat of the A section again at the end. So if you look at the score of this piece, you can see those repeats, and you can see where that A theme continuously comes back. Maybe you can hear it when you listen to the recording as well. And the piece is in 3/8 time, meaning that there's 3 beats in each measure, and the 8th note gets 1 beat. And I'm just gonna give you a couple more key pieces of information about this piece in case you wanna explore it and you wanna look at it. It is on IMSLP. You can find it in the original form. It's a little bit hard to read, and so when I learned the piece, I was working from this book, At the Piano with Women Composers. It's published by Alfred, edited by Maurice Hinson, and it's a pretty great edition. It has some good fingering suggestions, some good dynamic markings, and things like that. You'll notice if you have the score or if you order the score, I did do a few of my own things when it came to dynamics, things that I thought would sound good. And in this move in particular, there's several spots where the fingering is just a little bit awkward, and I also went off of what the score said and made some of my own fingerings because the fingerings that were written in the book were really awkward for me. You can see here I measured 24, 25, 26, 27. I crossed out the fingering and I wrote in my own fingering. And that's something that's totally okay to do in music. When you're playing something, if it's super awkward and it's really uncomfortable, you can always change the fingering. You just want to make sure that you're being really consistent with the fingering. So you don't want to waffle back and forth between many different fingerings. You want to pick a fingering and then stick to it so you can get that into your muscle memory. Now, usually the editor's suggestions for fingering, depending on the edition, are pretty good because people that are editing the music have some kind of knowledge generally. So I always start with the fingering that's written in the score. I always go for that suggestion because someone else has already done the work for me. And then I only change it if it's super awkward or if something feels better under my hand or if I have a better idea. Now you'll also notice here in this picture that I changed the fingering. I measure 178 and 179. Again, this part was really awkward for me, and so I crossed out the original fingering and wrote in my own fingering. These two spots in this piece are just really, really awkward. The way that they lay underneath the hand is really interesting. And so if you're gonna learn this piece, when you get to these two spots, it's really just kind of making the best of an awkward situation anyway. You probably won't ever get it to the point that it's feeling super easy or super comfortable, but you can come up with a fingering or use a suggested fingering and hopefully get it feeling okay so that you can actually play it. Now my pointers for learning this piece would be to first start by going through and making sure that you know how to count everything. We're in 3/8 time, and for the most part it's 8th notes and 16th notes, and none of the rhythm is particularly mind-blowing, but it's always really good to make sure that we have a good understanding of the rhythmic structure of a piece before we dive in and start to play notes. It's in the key of E flat major, and so it would be a really smart idea to maybe play some E flat major scales, do some chord progression exercises in the key of E flat major, maybe the key of B flat major as well. And if you're not really familiar with scales, I do have a whole entire 14-day piano scale challenge, and I would suggest you check that out because scales are really fundamental building blocks when we're learning how to play the piano, so it's really important to know how to play them. And it's for any level, beginner and beyond. You can check that out right here. Now, once you had a good sense of the rhythmic structure and the key signature, then you could start going through and you could start writing in the different sections. So like I was telling you, there's an A section and a B section and a C section and returns of the A sections, and you want to make sure you label those in your music so that you have a good idea of structurally how the piece looks. And this is always a really great thing to do in our practice. When we're learning a piece, we're always learning on many different levels. So we're looking at the micro, we're looking at the macro, and we're looking at the whole entire thing. It works best if we know how things relate to each other on a really micro level, on a macro level, and if we zoom out and look at things from a structural level within the context of the whole entire piece. Now, once you've done those things and you start actually putting your hands on the keyboard, because there are some awkward scale sections in this piece, I did a lot of flash practice and I did a lot of practice in rhythms, and that helped me to get more of a smooth and glassy sound on some of those scale passages and to make sure that things were as even sounding as I wanted them to be. If you have already watched the videos about flash practice and rhythms, you might know how to do those. That's awesome. If not, you can look at the videos. They're both in this playlist right here. Just look for the thumbnails that say flash practice and practicing in rhythms. I would highly suggest that you do look at this piece. It's so much fun to play. I absolutely fell in love with it the second that I got this book and started to read through it. It's a really fun one, and it's also a piece that sounds really, really difficult, and it's not super, super difficult. I would say if you're wanting a level, it's probably about a level 7 piece, which is like late intermediate, early advanced. It's not really, really far into the advanced category. If you know something about Marianna Von Auenbrugger that I don't know, or if you decide to go off and research her and you find something that I didn't mention in this video, please comment below. I would love to learn more about her. I'm obsessed with this sonata, and I'm fascinated by the history and the lives of composers. Thanks so much for being with me today. Here's the recording of me playing the whole entire piece.